Erica Prather. She is probably one of the she's very close to me, a wonderful person, an amazing advocate, and uses really awesome methods in order to get people more involved in activism. Erica is an organizer on federal policy in Arizona. As her role as National Outreach Representative for Defenders of Wildlife, Erica brings a wide array of experiences to her work, including over a decade of editorial pursuits, creating films, podcasts, and the written word. Originally from Kansas, she has taught science in South Korea, guided in Alaska, mended trails with the Environmental Agency of Iceland, and worked as a campaign assistant for the Colorado-based environmental nonprofit Rocky Mountain Wild. In Arizona, Erica is inspired to create community around conservation-oriented values, finding joy in the intersections of a wide variety of worldviews. She is motivated to empower constituents throughout the state to vocalize their concern to their members of Congress, often through creative collaboration. The desert Southwest is a source of perpetual beauty and mystery. Erica is honored to act as one of the many stewards of this landscape and its biodiversity. Erica, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Rosie. And so happy to be here. And this is going to be a little bit interactive. So hopefully, folks, if you've got some coffee or some tea or something to kind of jazz you up, because I want to hear from you a little bit today as well. So first things first, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And as Rosie said, I am in Tucson. And that is the ancestral and stolen lands of the Tohono O'odham people, an amazing place. We've had a fantastic monsoon season this year. So that's me. I'll share my email at the end of this. The essence of my job with Defenders of Wildlife is to empower people to use their voice, that's why I love that this conference is called Speak for Wolves, because wolves don't have opposing thumbs to call their member of Congress, but you guys do and I do. So, I think it's a great thing to do to help speak and advocate for them. So a couple reminders as we get started. First of all, I think there's a lot of people that I think want to argue with Karens on Facebook, or maybe you just kind of take the slacktivist route. It might not be you all, but I've certainly fallen prey to that. And I think 2016 was a wake-up call for everybody. And it certainly was for me to get more politically engaged and involved. But it is not my background. I actually have a performing arts background. I studied literature and dance, later biology, but I don't have a law degree. I don't have a political science degree. I just love what I do and love the natural world. And so that's motivated me a lot. And I want to empower you all today to remember that. This whole process, like participating in politics and advocacy, can feel really overwhelming and bureaucratic, and it's designed to be that way, but it doesn't have to be. And it can be a really powerful way that we can find community with each other, and also an antidote to despair, because it's a really tough world, right? Like, we're in a pandemic with a pretty, sometimes stymied political system. And so I just want to, again, say these people, when we're talking about activism and directing your advocacy towards decision makers, that these folks work for you. They want to get reelected, and I want you to feel empowered and emboldened, and not like, oh, I'm not an expert, or I don't know enough about the law to raise my voice. Like, you do, all of you here today, I guarantee you know more than your decision maker in a lot of the areas that you are experts on. And so just want to empower everybody today to be using their voice. And also, I think it's fair too to feel like this system sucks and is broken at the same time that we're working within the system. Multitude of truths. It is not the best system. There is a lot of corruption and horrible influence in our political system, but we've also been able to see incredible things and movement through grassroots power. Obviously, the one that's coming to mind for me and everyone's very familiar with is what happened in Colorado. It was grassroots movement and grassroots power that got wolf reintroduction on the ballot in the first place, and then actually enough votes to get that passed. So let's do this. So first thing, okay, what types of advocacy have you done? When I say advocacy, have you called your elected official? Have you written a letter to the editor? Have you met with a legislator? What have you done? And also, so I'm interested in that just to kind of get a read for the room. And also, like, what skill are you looking to sharpen? And, I'm hoping that we'll have a little bit of time for, some Q&A at the end. And if there's questions, I'm hoping throughout this presentation to kind of demystify some of these processes, because I hear a lot like, does any of this work? And is anyone listening to me? And I want you guys to kind of understand how some of that works, and also to help you kind of get some wheels turning and some ideas going for how you can step up your advocacy game. So again, these couple of questions to drop in the chat. What types of advocacy have you engaged in, and what are you interested in learning more about and sharpening? I'm not going to read this whole quote, but if you haven't read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, it's a beautiful book. And I love this piece where she talks about, believing in a democracy of species, which I think we all do here, and being a good citizen to the earth and in right relationship to the earth and to all of our more than human relatives, means engaging in the political process. And I know it can be scary and hard, and like, who wants to think about this at the end of a long workday, but that's how things are done. So I love that. To quote our town council meeting woman, show up for the damn meeting, political action, civic engagement. These are powerful acts of reciprocity with the land. Let's lead with the wisdom of Maples. So I think of your political engagement and activism as just an act of love. All right, so as Rosie mentioned, I work on federal policy, and that's, so that's basically what I'm most focused on. And I know that a lot of the sessions have been focused on the exact thing that something I would do through my job with Defenders of Wildlife, which is, hey, we're targeting Secretary Holland, which is on the federal level, to get wolves relisted federally. And there's lots of ways we can do that, which is like, reaching out to her directly, reaching out to members of Congress and getting them to sign on to a letter that says, hey, all these members of Congress support wolf reintroduction. So, Defenders does do work on the state level as well as federal, but the reason I'm in Arizona is it's because it's a state that's changing politically. It's a swing state. I'm sure you guys all took note. I think we were like one of the last states to get our votes actually in the 2020 election, and we did flip blue. We also were one of the states that turned the Senate blue as well. Well, not blue, but like purple, I guess. And so a lot of my job here, it's super hyper focused on federal, because our state landscape is actually quite red. So again, as a reminder, why it's important to be engaging like on every level of government. Let me just state that every level is important. Federal level is extremely narrow margins. As a reminder, we are just a couple of seats ahead in the House, and we are basically tied in the Senate. And just to plant a seed, 2022 could get ugly. It's time to start thinking about that. It's time to start looking at, is your district getting gerrymandered? Mine is here in Arizona. Losing both chambers would really suck. And so that's something that, like, keeping an eye on this and engaging in this. I think we all learned again in 2016 that politics is not a spectator sport. And when we treat it like a spectator sport, we potentially get a fascist leader. So let's not let that happen again. Other forms of government. So these are things that I engage in too, like outside of my job. Who represents you on city council, and what's their policy on climate and extinction and whatever? State legislation, same thing. County level resolutions here in Arizona. What we're doing to have these different levels of government interplay with each other is there's a National Biodiversity Strategy resolution, so a House bill on the federal level, and we'd like to basically urge our more moderate members of Congress to sign on to that piece of legislation. So we're doing it through other methods, saying like, hey, if the city of Phoenix passes a resolution to address the extinction crisis, that might make a member of Congress kind of say, oops, Like, that's what my constituents want. And if I want to keep my job and get reelected, I better pay attention. You know, again, like in Colorado, I know that those of you who are tuning in from Colorado, there have been some county level resolutions and city level resolutions to in support of the 30 by 30 initiative, which is, again, a really great thing that folks like me, for my job, I can turn to a decision maker in a meeting and say, hey, look, it's not just me and defenders that thinks this way and the science, it's also all your constituents. Look at these county level resolutions and state level resolutions and all these other things that people are doing on the grassroots level to get folks to sit up and pay attention to this issue. So I think that, like, yes, the federal level gets the most attention because it's the presidency and everything, and it is really important. But the other thing about these kind of, more closely related forms of government is things get done a lot faster. The federal level moves. I often say my job is like wading through concrete. So you can get stuff passed at a city or county level much quicker than you can at a federal level. And even like right now, like, so I don't know if you guys are paying attention, but budget reconciliation and the infrastructure packages, which are dealing a lot with the climate and ecological crisis, those funding, a lot of those fundings actually went directly to the city. Like, I know in the city of Tucson, we're already seeing how some of those massive, $1 trillion packages are going to play out in our state and city level and communities. And so there's a federal local nexus to explore. So lots of ways to get started and engaged with your advocacy on many different levels, and it all matters and it all counts. So this is a fun little hodgepodge of, at the very top is a border wall protest. We don't really like that down here in Arizona or the borderlands in general. The bottom kind of middle is a paper crane folding project we did right before the pandemic in support of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. On the far right is actually lobbying Congress. On the bottom is some letters from some kids. And then the kind of top left is actually a Photoshop project I did. I Photoshopped the border wall in several national parks to get folks' attention, including Glacier National Park, our northern border, to be like, how's that feel in your backyard? The point of me showing you all of this is the political piece that we're going to get into a little bit later about like what happens when you make a call and writing a letter to the editor and these kind of more like established forms. These things are all important and powerful, but I think that like it can be very cathartic to bring parts of yourself that, in the creative process and, really having this as like an act of love, because people in decision maker offices kind of get bored too, right? Like, and they're only human, like they get so many petitions and phone calls and letters and blah, blah, blah. So, but if you can show them something in a different way, or like Greenpeace does really cool stuff in this nature, like they made a massive plastic eating monster that they put outside of like Nestle Corporation, and it would just like barf out plastic. And that's really cool creative ways to engage with these issues. So that it doesn't always feel like this really sterile process. And so I just think like, I just always want to encourage people to bring that part of themselves. If you guys are familiar with the author, Terry Tempest Williams, she did this beautiful project called Testimony in support of America's Red Rock Wilderness Act, where she had various poets and writers throughout the country submit this beautiful, piece of poetry, their own writing, and then she handed it to every member of Congress. And so just remember that like, that's the way our brains are made, right? Like our big, bulky, complicated cortex is sitting on top of like our reptilian brain and our emotional center. And so that's why it's really important when you're advocating to be touching into like the human part of that, like the part that I think sometimes in conservation we get a little bit scared of, because it's the intrinsic parts and the parts that make us cry maybe or laugh and love something. But I think, and I know Rosie feels the same, I think marrying our hearts and minds and souls to policy making and legalese is important, and it's missing in the conservation movement. So bring that part of yourself always. I super, super encourage that. More dropping in the chat. I have not again checked it, but I will once I'm done sharing my screen. Let's explore this a little bit. I know Rosie and I have both done workshops with our lovely friend Jovan, creative writing workshops. why do you advocate? Why are you here on a Sunday on Zoom? I mean, there's a million things you could be doing besides the Speak for the Wolves conference. What is your why? Like, why is it? And I think this can change and shift, and it's something that's great to be exploring all the time. Like, I thought about this the other day. I thought, if it was like wolves that were the ones that were causing climate change and whatever, then I'd be like speaking for the humans or whatever. but it's not. So that's why, like, I want to speak for wolves. I mean, it's all tied together, and I do want to speak for humans as well. But I think, like, just touching into that can be a really powerful antidote also to fatigue and burnout, which I'm sure all of us feel at some point. Like, this is an uphill battle. And even though Martin Luther King says the moral arc always bends towards justice, sometimes doesn't feel that way. So sharing why you advocate is really important, and I encourage you guys to do that in the chat right now. And also, what skills or gifts do you have? So, like, one thing that I have that is kind of bizarre is like my performing arts background. So I've done some really cool things at national parks where I've been an artist in residence, and I morph my body as a former dancer into like endangered and imperiled species. That's super far out. But if I wasn't in touch with this other part of myself, like, what are my gifts and my skills that I can be giving this community, then I would never have that thought. So, like, are you a painter? Are you a writer? Are you an architect? Do you collage things from magazines? Like, what other parts of yourselves can you bring to this movement to really, like, I don't know, like, let your soul shine a little bit in this work? So now we're going to look at some examples. So we're kind of change a little bit, move away from these intrinsic pieces, but it's something that I would like to keep in the back of your mind always, and kind of demystify a little bit of the political process and kind of go over some of the tactics that we use a lot in outreach at Defenders of Wildlife, and like a lot of organizations we use. And we all work together too. One thing I don't know if folks always know that, but it's like Defenders and Audubon and Wild Earth Guardians and Sierra Club and Wilderness Society. We all work together. We all share information. We lobby together. We're on each other's teams. And I'll show you how we kind of amplify activists like you and your messages a little bit later towards the end. So here's one more thing I want to really get you amped up before I start showing you some of these specific tactics, is how powerful your voice is. I really love this, and I sometimes want to show this to our lobbyists, because there are lobbyists on my team, and sometimes we think a little bit differently because I'm with the people in the grassroots, and they're having these conversations in four walls in DC, and sometimes it's like, what? Look at Visit from a Lobbyist. It's almost dead last. So you, as an amateur, as like a non-lobbyist, just a citizen, you are number one. In-person issue visit from constituent. That's you, Rosie or Jody or Steph or Amanda. I'm just seeing some people's names on my screen. Showing up virtually. We've been doing all our meetings virtually and having great success, or hopefully one day in person, and saying, hey, my name's Erica. I live in Arizona. I'm totally concerned about the biodiversity crisis because XYZ is sharing my personal story. That is the most effective tool we have. Contact from a constituent representative. That could be someone like me. But basically, that's the whole reason for my job, right? Like, in district pressure. We're not having these conversations on the Hill. I'm saying, I live in Arizona. I'm meeting here with you, with Arizonans. These are your people. It's your job to listen to us. This is what we want. Email messages that are individualized. So something that you are taking the time to actually write. Letters. An LTE. Telephone town halls. That's happening. I don't know if you guys saw what happened to Rand Paul the other week. That was kind of funny, but kind of not. But you can call in during telephone town halls or show up to town halls when those are happening. Phone calls, again, visit from lobbyists, and the form email messages. So I think it's important to look at this and see, again, just how powerful and influential you really can be as just a citizen that cares. So I get this question a lot when I sound an alarm here to the Arizona activists and I say, oh my gosh, then this actually just happened a couple weeks ago with a really bad amendment that was being discussed. That was like this massively terrible deforestation amendment, and our senators were kind of like in the driver's seat with it. And so people always go, okay, you know, I called, and especially now because of COVID, staffers are working from home. You are rarely talking to a live person when you're calling Congress and leaving messages. Does it really matter? Does it make a difference? Well, yes. So every call is recorded and reported. It is often when someone is actually answering, it's like a young, like 20-something intern who doesn't know usually what you're talking about. And I call a lot. I have my members of Congress number in my phone. So I'm out walking the dog, takes me 2 minutes. And I call and say, hey, Senator Sinema, you know, bipartisanship isn't actually a value, and all the counties around me are going to be uninhabitable in 20 years. So if you don't do something about the climate, like, I'm literally going to die. And I mean, you know, you can do this, like, speak from the heart. You should make it a practice, right? Like, how about at any time you want to get on Instagram or Facebook or like tell somebody they're wrong on Facebook, instead you call your senator, because it really does help elevate issues. And, you know, they're getting millions of calls, but especially when you start hitting them all at once, it really helps. Another example I have on this is about a year ago. Every year, there's the National Defense Authorization Act, and the U.S. Air Force was trying to take over more of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, which is sacred. We work on that issue with the Paiute people. The bighorn sheep are very sacred to them, and they're an endangered species. And we just had tons of people here in Arizona calling Representative Grijalva, since he's chair of House Natural Resources Committee. And I got word back from DC, we're getting our shins kicked, meaning like, whoo, they're feeling the heat from the constituents. They're getting a bunch of calls. So even if they don't call you back, somebody is sitting there saying, oh boy, a lot of people are calling about this. Better let somebody know. So calling is important. Be polite, be concise, reference bill numbers if you can. You don't always have to. I think that's another thing that people can get a little, flummoxed about, is you can just call and say, sometimes you can just call and ask them questions. I do that a lot. What is the senator doing to address the extinction crisis? What are they doing? I've encouraged constituents in meetings to just point blank ask that of a staffer. It's okay if they feel a little bit of pressure. So yes, calling does work. It is effective. I have just heard feedback consistently. And again, the one I'm referencing a couple of weeks ago, I actually got told, like, please stop having activists call this person because they're so annoyed. But you know what? That's their job. They're public servants. So it's okay to annoy them a little bit. So here's another example of a tool in your toolbox that you have. Some of you, I'm sure, have done this, written a letter to the editor. There's a couple here that are for Prop 114 wolf reintroduction. This is really powerful also in fighting misinformation and disinformation, which we know is rampant in the United States at the moment. Some of these can be, like the one on the top right is a little bit beefier and is talking about scientific data. And then there's also really short and sweet ones here also that are just really personal about people's connections to the wolves. And then, there's a couple other ones down in the middle. There was one that I did to thank our representatives here for voting positively in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So it's good. Also, we call it thanks and spanks, like, like spanking your representative or like kind of, or a senator for that matter, if they're doing something that you don't feel is right, but also always making sure it's like a dog, right? Positive reinforcement, give them treats when they do the right thing. So another question I get a lot, you guys, I'm sure, get flooded with petitions and text messages from Sierra Club and defenders, and you've signed up for everything, and me too, and it's blah. Where does this go? Where does it live? Why do I care? So it's really important actually for people like me. So I can walk into a meeting with constituents. Let's say I'm meeting with Representative O'Halloran. He's a moderate Democrat in Mexican gray wolf territory. And he really wafts on being pro or anti-wolf. And we can walk into a meeting and say, hey, actually 200 constituents in your district, we can pull that data. All of like the big green organizations, we can pull that data and we can say, actually 200 people signed this petition that has all this language in there about you supporting relisting wolves or whatever that is. So it's not, when you sign that petition, it actually kind of gets repurposed a lot of different ways. So what I'm telling you is do all of the things, like sign the easy, the low hanging fruit, the stuff that's in your inbox or your text, because we do use that. And we can also use it in media and say, hey, actually, and like folks I'm sure are really familiar with this, we can say, there was this many million people across the United States that oppose delisting the gray wolf. So we use it for data points like that. So that's where those things live. Also, sometimes you might be getting text messages from us, stuff like we did one last week on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. There was a bad amendment about the oil and gas leasing program there. And so we send out an action alert. Everybody got a text that said, you need to call or like do this thing right now. We also look at that data on the back end. So that's another data point that we can also use and like follow up and email or meetings and say, hey, we know you're hearing from constituents about this issue. What are you doing about it? So it gives us kind of more ammo going into those conversations, showing constituent support. And then on the right, I'm going to show a couple more examples, but so about a month ago, there were a couple activists here in Arizona that really wrote a pretty powerful, very fiery letter to the editor, to our senators here in Arizona, asking them to, support a big budget reconciliation package. And then, so not only was that in the earned media here in Arizona, but then, I can send that out to the coalition, who then can amplify that on their social. We amplify it on social. We tag those offices. I can send an email to those offices and say, did you see this letter to the editor? And so again, like a letter to the editor isn't just that. We then amplify it all over the place and just keep using it and repurposing it and showing that constituent pressure all day. Here's another couple cool examples with our youth. So on the right, we had a bunch of youth activists do a whole video about staying out of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge as an example. So like same thing, I know that we did one with wolves. It doesn't just live as this like one-time video on our social media. We then, are amplifying it all over the place, and we're tagging different bodies in that. And this, it was oil and gas companies, but whoever that might be, decision-making bodies. The one on the left was really cool. That's Rep. Kirkpatrick, who I have a great relationship with here in Arizona. And it just shows like someone on their end is seeing that when we tag them. So here you've got this amazing amplification, right? Like you had people calling, someone took a picture of the phone calls and tweeted about it to Ann Kirkpatrick, who then said, you have my vote. So you're able to like not just do one tactic, you can kind of blend them all together and just use it as an escalation tactic. There's a great book Patagonia wrote called Tools for Grassroots Activists. I would highly recommend it. They have fantastic case studies in there about how to apply grassroots pressure and run a campaign from the bottom up, because that's how change happens, is these ways. So that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop. Actually, I do want to tell you what this is from. We did a Biozine this year. It was the first time, and by we, I mean Defenders of Wildlife Biodiversity Ambassadors, and I would love it if you want to become a biodiversity ambassador. Basically what we do is we go over different issues that are happening at the federal level, then we take action together. But we did this really cool art project called a Biozine this year, and this is something that one of our activists here in Arizona made that I just loved. It was like a tarot deck of different species. And it's, again, something that's cool that we can hand to decision makers and say, these are things that are important to your constituents. Like, look at this beautiful piece of art. So that is about it. I hope you feel inspired and excited to take some action. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen and check out some of the.
You have a lot that were sent to Amanda as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
okay.
I'll send them to you.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay. People actively write and call. People have the power to change laws. Awesome. Advocacy, letters, calls, meetings, testimony, state level, fish and game meetings. Awesome. That's so important. Showing up to those state wildlife agencies, because I've been hearing on some of the other calls that, the hunters and fishers have a very strong voice in those circles. So for you to show up, that's super powerful and amazing. Yes, cool. Yes. Thank you, Rachel, for dropping in where to find your reps. Awesome. Yes, my sister, bringing children to this movement. They're most affected from the climate crisis and the human race. Thank you for clarifying. I advocate because I've always loved wolves. There's no logical rhyme or reason. I just enjoy them. I love that. I feel like they get a bad rap. We can do better for them. I'm creative in the arts. I'm a gifted speaker. I feel like I marry them well. You go for it. I love that. Someone sin or cinema doesn't care. True, but we still have to try. Advocating because you don't tolerate the deliberate infliction of suffering on any species. Yes.
That one sits well with you.
I think it's always great to hear other people's stuff because sometimes you hear something that resonates with you and you're like, oh yeah, me too. I just didn't think about that, you know? Okay, so now Rosie, you just sent me more. Okay. Yeah, you guys are on it. You're writing, you're speaking, lobbying, emailing, social media, mentoring. Mentoring is huge. I feel like, so in Arizona, I think I work a lot with like youth groups like Sunrise Movement and Arizona Youth Climate Coalition. And then I also have all these friends that have been doing this work forever that are in their 50s and 60s. And I feel like I'm always wishing there was more of a conduit between that. And I think that that's something that's really missing in like white supremacist culture. We don't have this elder transfer of knowledge. And I wish that happened like more frequently. So I love seeing that mentorship, like, and you know, I learn from the young people and old people too. I think mentorship goes all different directions. So I love seeing that mentorship is so important.
While you're reading through some of those, just a quick question for you, Erica. How do you, like, what is step one into getting into this complex, kind of overwhelming world of advocacy? What is like one step that you can do today that is easy, but it kind of steps out of your comfort zone? What would you suggest?
Ooh, I would say, you know, I think for one thing, finding a person in an organization that you can look to for guidance, because you're right, it is a lot to unpack and understand. So, you know, whether that's me or it's somebody at Sierra Club or whatever, to be like, hey, I have a full-time job. I mean, people have stuff going on, right? Like, how are you supposed to know all of the things all of the time? Being able to find somebody to kind of help you through that process, I think. And then I think also like challenging yourself, like, again, like, I think like if there, I mean, a lot of folks on this already do a lot. Like, is there something that either you're not doing, or is there like an interesting dot that can be connected that someone just isn't seeing yet? Like, I was in this great lobby meeting about a month ago, and it was amazing. It was Arizona Interfaith Coalition, so a religious sect, Mi Familia Vota, which is a Latinx organization that gets out the vote. And we were all, there was like several others, and it all seemed kind of random, but we were all there for the same reason, which was to ask for a big budget reconciliation package. And so like seeing synergies between groups, I think that can be something I would definitely suggest for folks, because people know more people than they think. We're kind of brainwashed to be disempowered through this process. So, yeah, wow, people are given a lot of stuff. Montana, deeply concerned with horrific legislation. Yeah. Using design to create public awareness. Yeah, that's super cool.
So I just want to reiterate, and I say this because I know Erica, she's a wonderful friend of mine, but I want to reiterate the fact that you don't, you know, your degree is in dance and writing, right?
Yeah.
And that you're using your talents and your gifts to advocate for wildlife. I think a lot of advocacy gets promoted as writing letters, making sure that you know every single detail of legislation, and disenfranchising the soul from the science. And can you speak a little bit to how you started to marry those two things, your art with the science that you're advocating for?
Yeah, I have one really great example is right when I started this job. And again, like, I had never lobbied Congress or like done anything when I started this job. But I took some congressional staff down to the border wall, which is a dark experience. And I read a poem there by Richard Shelton, who is a beautiful author here in Tucson. And so after we talked about all of, the laws and all the bad things and all the devastation that the wall is causing, I had a moment where I was like, I'd like us to all just take in this poem. And about 2 years later, that staffer reached out to me and was like, what was that poem? Like, of all, I mean, you guys, these staffers get slammed with a million things, but that stuck with her. What was that poem you shared? I want to share that with somebody else. And so I think like that was a moment for me that I was like, nobody else really is doing this. Like, it's either kind of like artists and scientists in two different rooms. And I've had people tell me, well, that's intentional, because when you marry like arts and activism, those things have always been together, right? Like when you think of the civil rights movement or any of these movements, these powerful moments of people singing and practicing joy. And I think that those things are, intentionally separated because they're so powerful and intoxicating and just like the ultimate, human expression when they're together. And so I think like spending a lot of time touching into like just loving the earth and taking those breaks and just like, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be going to a big park. It can just be standing in your backyard. I think those things are really powerful reservoirs, because it can be scary. I know people get like kind of nervous when they talk to these people in power, but we all have voices that we can use. So yeah.
Thank you, Erica. That was a really awesome example, and what a beautiful way to move that policy along, right? And we are at time, but I do want to thank you so much for your presentation. It's always an honor to share space with you. And thank you for being a part of this year's Speak for Wolves conference. I appreciate you so much. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Rosie. And thanks everyone for participating.
And Erica put her information in the chat as well for anyone who wants to connect. And I do encourage everyone to keep up with what Erica's doing. She's doing some pretty phenomenal things and with art and with activism. So feel free to keep in touch with her. Thank you again, Erica.